Associate Dean of its Graduate Institute program. And we're looking forward to an interesting and enlightening discussion.
That is the virtue of hope. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Can you hear me? I think I do. Yeah, there it is. Okay. It's a matter of distance. To talk about the Divine Comedy and the Bible is to deal with two oceans which promise the possibility of a double drowning. So I say that hoping that, like Jonah, I won't simply be spat up on a foreign shore. But, just bear in mind, we're talking with the Bible, and particularly with Dante's Bible, which is the Latin Vulgate, and would include what we call the Apocrypha. We're talking about 73 books. If we include, for example, Maccabees and certain parts of other books that are not included in the Bible. Anything that was only available in Greek from the Hebrew Scriptures tended to be not make the Reformation canon. So, and with Dante, we're talking about, with the comedy, a structure of 3 canticles called canticae, each singular cantica, and 14,233 lines of hendecasyllabic, that is 11 beats per line, rhyming lines in a very beautiful Italian form of verse called terza rima. So each little stanza has 3 lines to it. And not only the 14,233 lines, but over 650 similes. And Dante's similes are simply magnificent. They are, in many cases, the very heart of the poem, and you'll hear a few of these. But to just begin, he writes a letter. He spends much of his life in exile. He gets involved in the really complicated politics that ultimately devolved upon 2 major sources, the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire. And here is Florence, a newly, we might say, free republic city. Things are rather tenuous. Dante is on the Guelph side, the papal side, and that dominates Florence, as opposed to the Ghibelline side, which is the emperor. But then the Guelph side splits into white and black, and ultimately he's on the wrong side, and he spends most of his life in exile, even condemned to death were he to return. And it's ultimately extended even to his 3 children. So I think it's also amazing to think of the fact that he's writing this while in exile, going from one court to another. And one of his closest supporters is a man named Congrande della Scala. And he writes towards the end of his life, as he's finishing the Divine Comedy, which he writes roughly from about 1308 to 1321, which is the date of his death, the year of his death. All these lines. And he's also remarkably conversant with the whole classical world as it was known in the 13th century, especially the Latin writers. Dante, like so many of his time, did not know Greek. That was really just coming into Western Europe and the sources. The original sources of Plato and Aristotle and so on. It takes really all the way into what we think of the Renaissance of the 15th century. But at the same time, he knows them either because of Latin translations or Latin references to them. So if you think of Father Dion's rainbow that he gave us at the beginning of the Bible study, which showed us what the cross-referencings in the Bible are, if we were to take that and then add to that the classical tradition, and especially the Roman poets, and most of all, Virgil, who will guide him through the Inferno, the first Cantica, and then the Purgatorio, and then disappear. And Beatrice takes care of the rest, almost. Except even she has to stop, and then Bernard of Clairvaux ultimately takes him to the vision of God. I was reminded of this when in our hymn this morning we sang, "Though the eyes of sinful man thy glory may not see," which was in the second stanza of Holy, 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 our opening hymn. This is very much, I think, the way one could think of Dante's quest in the comedy, which culminates with a vision of God, which he ultimately finds to be inexpressible. So, having said that, he writes to Cangrande, and he says, let me tell you what the senses of writing are. And this will remind some of you of what Father Billy, the Redemptorist priest who spoke to us earlier during our winter session, about the various senses of literature, which ultimately, that tradition goes back to Augustine, and even before that to Origen and the early fathers of the church. He says, let me show you what this treatment is, taking a verse of scripture, which is Psalm 114. When Israel came out of Egypt and the house of Jacob from the people of foreign tongue, Judea became his sanctification, Israel his power. And so what, in a way, this verse is very, I think, strategically chosen by Dante, because this is another way, if you will, by analogy, of describing his own journey. He says, if we inspect the letter, first meaning alone, the departure of the children of Israel from Egypt in the time of Moses is presented to us, right? History. If the allegory, our redemption wrought by Christ, Israel coming out of Egypt. In the moral sense, the conversion of the soul from the grief and misery of sin to the state of grace is presented to us. And finally, in the anagogical sense, anagogy literally means being led up. The departure of the holy soul from the slavery of the corruption to the liberty of eternal glory is presented to us. And he says, essentially we have two senses. The final three, the moral, the allegorical, the anagogical, all fit under essentially a kind of allegorical or mystic sense. And so with that, let's begin. The first lines of the poem are among the most immortal, I think, that have been written in any language, as it's in the Inferno, which is the first. Each one of these canticles is a book. And he says, and I should add too, since a number of you were here last week to discuss the Hezekiah's Song of Thanksgiving from Isaiah. It's written there, in the midst of my days, I shall go to the gates of hell. And that's what happens with Dante. He says, in the middle of the journey of our life, I came to myself within a dark wood where the straight way was lost. So we open the poem with Dante, this figure, at about the age of 35, we figure, because he's thinking of the biblical 70 years and 10. So he's telling us that he's around 35. So this would have probably been, he was born in 1265. So this is right around the signal year, the millennial year of 1300. And in doing this, he comes to himself. Think of our sermon this morning. Between the rock and the hard place, right? He comes out, he sees the sun, he tries first in vain to climb a mountain. And there's endless discussion whether the mountain is a kind of anticipation of the Mount of Purgatory, which is the 7-story mountain of the second canticle, but we won't get into that here. He can't do it. And he sees a spotted leopard, a lion, and a she-wolf. Those animals come to us biblically in Jeremiah, in the 5th chapter. They represent, it seems, for Dante, the leopard, lust, the lion, pride, and the she-wolf, covetousness. All manner of desire and self-reference. And he sees a figure who calls to him with a rather weak voice, Miserere di me, have mercy on me. The opening, of course, of the 51st Psalm. It turns out the voice is coming from whom he later calls his master and author, Virgil, the author of the Aeneid, the great epic of the founding of Rome from, as it were, the refugees from Troy, Aeneas and his family and followers. And Dante, in his age, sees this, the founding of Rome is providential because it is what makes possible the spreading of the gospel. Despite Paul's difficulties and challenges with Rome, where he ultimately is martyred, it's what, if you will, what is called the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, provides the roads and the passages that enable Christianity to spread. So we see the Acts of the Apostles begins in Jerusalem and it ends in Rome. So he then says, Virgil says, he must take another route. He can't try to climb up the mountain. He has to first go through the eternal place of despair, which is hell, where those who have inalterably changed their will or directed their will from the good, then to the mountain of those contented in the fire, which is purgatory, who will come to the tribes of the blessed, which is ultimately going to be paradise, and he says, where a soul more worthy than I will guide you, namely Beatrice, then on to paradise. And Virgil then explains that Beatrice has sent him, first prompted by St. Lucy, we think of Lucia, light, who was sent to her, namely to Beatrice, by Mary, the mother of Jesus. So, that's the sort of backstory. Now to look at the song from which each of the 3 canticles, a cantor song from each of the 3 canticles that we're going to look at. So essentially we're going to talk about Beatrice, Dante, and finally the love that moves the stars. Because it turns out that that love is the origin and ultimately the goal of everything and everyone. They enter the gate of hell, and it has a rather daunting inscription. I'll just give you part of it. "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." You've probably heard that quoted, ripped out of context, and thought of certain places that you've had to go. And you think, and you can fill in the blanks here. I'm not giving any personal confessions. And besides, my wife is here. And then it says, "The highest wisdom and primal love made me." Think of that. The Inferno is made by primal love and eternal love. Primal love and highest wisdom, I should say. So, how could that be? That's a real puzzle. What I can make, one way perhaps to think of it would be to say, the individual soul made in the image and likeness of God is given reason and affection and, if you will, desire. And the whole question is, what are the objects of desire? What is reason used for? What is the relationship between reason and desire? If desire, unbridled, dominates or uses reason to live its life and chooses that inalterably, in effect, it would seem that the primal love is saying, you, I made in my image, are now making yourself into a rather different kind of God. And that's what we see then, I think, in the canto that I want to look at. That's Canto 5. It's probably one of the most famous passages in the whole poem. And it's the story where he meets two lovers swirling around endlessly in battling winds, whose names are Paolo and Francesca. And let me give you the backstory. Dante doesn't always do that. He sort of expects you to figure it out. And so this has provided, just endless work for century upon century of commentators. But the basic story, I think, is this. Francesca da Rimini is married to Giovanni Malatesta, who's a nobleman, and she is a noble woman. But Giovanni is the crippled son, but the firstborn of the Lord of Rimini. And Giovanni's younger brother, Paolo, becomes Francesca's lover. What Dante doesn't tell us is apparently this relationship went on for 10 years. And the thing is, there are many things, I guess, about Giovanni, the older brother, that Paolo covets. But I think most of all, perhaps, Francesca. And it turns out Giovanni discovers them during their tryst and kills both of them. Dante would have probably known the murdered lover, Paolo, as a dashing captain in Florence, because Florence was constantly at war or kind of in a state of sort of cloudy with a chance of showers politically. So that puts us in a position, and and it's interesting, it's only Francesca who speaks. When Dante and Virgil approach, she says, O living being, gracious and benign, who through the darkened air have come to visit our souls that stained the world with blood, if he, capital H, who rules the universe, were friend to us, then we should pray to him to give you peace. For you have pitied our atrocious state. Whatever pleases you to hear and speak will please us to hear and speak with you. Now, while the wind is silent in their place. So in order for them to have this conversation, the gale has died down. And the land where I was born, she says, lies on that shore to which the Po River, together with the waters that follow it, descends to final rest. And then love, amor, that can quickly seize the gentle heart, took hold of him because of the fair body taken from me. How that was done still wounds me. Love, that releases no beloved from loving, took hold of me so strongly through his beauty that, as you see, it has not left me yet. Love led the two of us unto one death, Kaina, which is the lowest circle of hell, waits for him who took our life. And then, all right, then she says, note that Francesca names love, amor, as seizing Paolo, releasing no one who is loved, namely herself, then leading them both to one death, while in flagrante delicto, in the very misdeed, the ultimate consummation of their love. And it moves Dante to pity to see them in this state of perpetual restlessness, battered about by the winds of this circle. And yet, here they are in this atrocious state, unrepentant and fixed in devotion to their God, Amor. And Dante says to her, Francesca, your afflictions move me to tears of sorrow and pity, but tell me, in the time of gentle sighs, with what and in what way did love allow you to recognize your still uncertain longings? And she said to me, there is no greater sorrow than thinking back upon a happy time in misery. This in Italian are the very words that Virgil uses in the Aeneid to describe Dido when she first meets Aeneas and is smitten, remembering what it was like when she loved her murdered husband. So it's this, you get a sense of these layers that he uses. Yet, if you long so much to understand the first root of our love, then I shall tell you my tale to you as one who weeps and speaks. One day, to pass the time away, we read of Lancelot, how love had overcome him. We were alone, and we suspected nothing. And time again, that reading led our eyes to meet and made our faces pale, and yet one point alone defeated us. When we had read how the desired smile was kissed by one who was so true a lover, this one, who never shall be parted from me, she's obviously pointing to Paolo, while all his body trembled, kissed my mouth. A Galahad, indeed, that book, and he who wrote it, too, that day. And then, that day, we read no more. And that's it. So, with this, Paolo, notice, says nothing but weeps. Dante faints, and the translation reads, as if I had met my own death. But if you, the Italian is really powerful. It goes, e cadi come corpo morto cadi. Cade. E cadi come corpo morto cade. And I fell the way a dead body falls. I think it's a lot better in Italian. And believe me, I am no Italianist. I fake it with Latin and French. But it's just amazingly powerful. And why does he fall? What does it mean that he's so affected by this? Well, we'll find out, I guess, or at least we'll get further hints. So he has much more to learn in his progress with Virgil through 7 more spiraling circles down to Caina, the 9th circle of hell, reserved for the likes of Giovanni, their murderer, and of all traitors to kin, to city, to guests, and to benefactors. When the two reach, that is, Dante and Virgil, finally reach the enormous hulking figure of Satan, Beelzebub, Dis, the 3-faced emperor of the dolorous realm, not the realm that we're all using, munching on Brutus, Cassius, and Judas. Brutus and Cassius being the friends and colleagues of Julius Caesar, whom they murder, which could have thwarted the whole Roman endeavor. And Judas, of course, who betrayed his friend and leader and master, Jesus. So, leaving hell, the two of them emerge. I won't go into how it's really complicated, but you've got a map. And the final words of the canto are, when they finally emerge onto the shore of the Mount of Purgatory, once more to see the stars. And every cantica ends with some reference to the stars. Again, something we all need in moments of doubt to be able to see. So, Purgatory, roughly its structure, the 7-story mountain, there's a pre-purgatory, which I won't even go into, it's just a very rich part of the poem. And then the capital sins, the lowest level being pride, then envy, then anger, then sloth, then avarice, gluttony, and finally at the top, lust. And it's interesting that lust is one of the higher, closer to earth, ordinary earth, in the Inferno, and lust is higher than, that is, because where we're headed ultimately is to a place called the earthly paradise, which is going to be the launching pad to Paradiso. And here you want to say, well, where does purgatory come from? Where are the ideas? Is there any biblical reference? Well, here again, if we look at Dante's Bible, there is, in the 2nd book of Maccabees, in the 12th chapter, 46th verse, it is written, Judas Maccabeus says after a battle, remember Hanukkah and what that's about, and so on and so forth, the struggle against the Greek hegemony at that point over Israel and Judah. It is therefore a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, that they may be loosed from their sins. And that is what, if you will, that's our doctrine that we profess, at least implicit in it, the communion of saints. The people in purgatory are praying for each other, and they're asking the intercession of the saints in paradise. And here, of course, we have a mortal, Dante, passing through and seeing what he would say, no mortal has ever seen. And so what's different about purgatory, hell is eternal night. It's very hard to tell what amount of time is passing. Purgatory, on the other hand, is There is day and night, unlike in hell. People stop at night, they go to sleep, and they have dreams. Dante has 3 amazingly complicated dreams in purgatory, which I won't talk about. But the souls in purgatory, unlike the ones in hell who are resolved in their sin, and if anything, as we just heard with Francesca, will try to justify what they're doing or have done or repeat it. Here, the souls are full of hope. They pray for each other, and each terrace has its own angel guardian and is linked to one of the Beatitudes and displays images of virtue. The first example being something always related to the Mother of Christ. And there is constant music of the Psalms and liturgical hymns in Latin that Dante and his readers would have been familiar with. So you have to imagine, and this is hard for us to do, if you're reading the Divine Comedy and you see the reference to a particular psalm. I heard them sing, and he will tell you what he heard, usually in Latin, so you have to flip back to the notes if you don't know Latin. And then his contemporaries would have known these, and so Purgatorio is full of music. It's chanted by the penitents on their way up the mountain. And Dante has 7 P's for each of the capital sins inscribed on his forehead. And as he goes from terrace to terrace, there's a guardian angel who removes it from, sort of like, okay, you've done that part of your exam. And then he and Virgil begin their ascent with each being removed as they ascend. Virgil doesn't get them. Virgil really belongs in the first circle of hell is for those who were good, who practiced, you might say, a kind of pagan or natural virtue, but did not know baptism. And so there are exceptions, but we're not going to go into those either. But that's where Virgil has come from. And so he hears, let's go all the way up as they're leaving the 7th, the terrace of lust, to go into the earthly paradise. And he hears the song sung, "Blessed are the pure in heart, beati mundo corde." The 6th beatitude from Matthew 5. But then he hears the announcement, "There is no way farther, holy souls, unless the fire's sting is felt." And Dante, in hearing this, is reminded of the burned bodies he once saw, probably at public executions in the Piazza di Signoria in Florence. And once again, Dante says, again, here's this wonderful echo back and forth between the canticles. "I heard him like one that is laid in the grave." Yet there will be no seeing Beatrice unless Dante first passes through this temporal purging fire. And Virgil reassures him, "If you stayed in the heart of this flame 1,000 years, it could not touch the hair of your head. Put away every fear. Enter with confidence." But Dante balks. He says, "I stood still, but against my conscience." Think again of being between a rock and a hard place. I stood still, but against my conscience. But then Virgil says to him, "Look now, my son, between Beatrice and you is this wall." And with that, Dante tells us, Virgil put himself into the fire before me. So Dante follows him. He says, I'd have thrown myself into molten glass to find coolness. That's the way he expresses the intensity of the fire that he feels. And he tells us that they heard a voice beyond that sings the words from Matthew 25, "Come, blessed of my Father." So then, both of them having passed through, Virgil can now say, "The temporal fire and the eternal have you seen, my son, and have come to a part where I on my own can discern no further." Virgil is saying, I've taken you as far as I can. I have brought you here with understanding and with skill, and from now on, listen, this is so marvelous. Take your pleasure for your guide till the fair eyes come rejoicing, which weeping made me come to you. No longer expect word or sign from me. Your will is free. Act on its bidding. I thus crown and mitre you over yourself. Imagine any king, president, pope, or archbishop saying that to one of us. Note the imagery, though, of crown and mitre, the emblems of emperor and pope that are now ascribed to Dante's purified, rightly directed desire and conscience. So it's the heart and the mind and desire. So Dante and Virgil, in attaining this summit of the mount, have reached the earthly paradise, and now, curiouser and curiouser, Alice said, actually, that's not in the not the garden described in Genesis, but a holy forest in dramatic contrast to the dark wood that opened the Inferno. Again, these marvelous kind of images and distortions. Passing through this, they come upon a grand procession, analogous to the Eucharistic procession that would have been held on the Feast of Corpus Christi, which in the calendar, and still does in the Roman Catholic Church, the Sunday after Trinity Sunday. But this turns out, so this whole idea of a very elaborate procession that is an affirmation of faith becomes an allegorical pageant led by 7 blazing candles that represent the gifts of the Spirit from Isaiah 11, 24 elders representing the Hebrew Scriptures. But where does 24 come from? It must come from the Apocalypse, the book of Revelation. Then a chariot pulled by a winged griffin, that legendary creature with whose tunas of eagle and lion here represents the two natures of Christ as human and divine, what theologians call the hypostatic union, surrounded by 4 living creatures: man, lion, ox, and eagle. Ezekiel. Those are where the animals come from. But think of what they signify. Think of our baptismal font. Look closely at it. It represents the 4 Gospels, each one assimilated to one of the evangelists. The man, John; the lion, Mark. Those of you who have been to Venice, what do you see? Lions everywhere. Because supposedly the relics of St. Mark are in St. Mark's, stolen from Egypt. The ox, Luke, and the eagle, John, representing then the Gospels. But this, it's like late night TV with Vegematic. That's not all. Remember the 4 figures, okay? After these, the elders and figures are singing a Latin version of the words we sang this morning, slightly altered, no pun intended, at the Sanctus. Benedictus qui venus, blessed are you who come. But it's a singular you. And there are yet more figures representing the epistles and revelation, the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity in the proper colors of white, green, and red. Again, if you've seen pictures of the cathedral at Florence, all of the marble cladding is red, white, and green. If you look at the Italian flag, it's red, white, and green. And the cardinal virtues, the virtues possible to pagan and Christian alike, justice, fortitude, temperance, and prudence. The procession halts with a thunderclap. And the 24 elders turn to look back at the chariot with this figure in it. And one of them, the elders, must be Solomon, calls out, think of the Song of Songs, "Come, Lebanon, come from Lebanon, my bride." Who is the figure in the chariot? A lady in red, veiled in white, with a green mantle. Can anyone guess? I bet you can, you're just being shy. At her very presence, Dante trembles in awe. He can't really see who it is, but he somehow knows. Though, he says, without seeing the concealed lofty virtue that comes from her eyes, he feels nevertheless old love's great power. Another line from the Aeneid, Dido's line again, which had pierced him in his boyhood when he first saw Beatrice, talk about precociousness, at age 9. She was age 8. And again, he sees her 9 years later at age 18. It is Beatrice. By the way, at that age, she's already married to somebody else. You know, marriages are arranged, not to him. He turns to his left, the sinister side, looking for Virgil. And he says, and here's one of these similes I was talking about, as a little child runs to his mother when he is afraid. But Virgil is gone, leaving him bereft, whom he now celebrates, as he mentions this, Virgilio dolcissimo padre. Virgil, my sweetest or gentlest father. So we get images of mother and father at the same time. And then he says, nor did all the ancient mother, who's that? Eve, lost, avail my cheeks washed with dew, that they should not be stained again with tears. And the ancient mother, of course, is the Eve who lost with her husband Adam, Eden. So the lady in red, white, and blue now addresses Dante by name, the only time in the poem, this poem, that his name is mentioned. Dante, because Virgil leaves you, she says, don't weep yet, because you must weep for another sword. Yikes. He turns as he hears his name, and she speaks to him sternly, though like one holding back her hottest words. Look well at me. I truly am. I am indeed Beatrice. So here we have their two names together explicitly. Why did you bother to come to this mountain? Didn't you know that here mankind is happy? Can you imagine a mother who says Not, I'll give you something to cry about, but rather, you're supposed to be happy. What an exchange. Dante is so greatly shamed now that he averts his eyes and says, so, simile again, does a stern mother seem harsh to her child? Stern pity this. With compassion for him, the attending angels sing the first stanza of Psalm 31. In you, O Lord, have I trusted. Let me never be put to shame, which of course are also adopted to one of the verses of the Te Deum. Yet Beatrice persists, reminding him of the promise Dante had shown in his early life, which she had inspired with her youthful eyes, putting him on the straight path even as her spiritual beauty drew him to virtue. So initially things are going the way they should, but he forgot her once she departed this life, once she died. We don't know how she died, probably in childbirth, as so many women did and still do. He took to another way, led by false images from which she tried to recall him, by dreams and by other means, until her last resort was her tearful prayers to Virgil, having been sent by Lucy, who was sent by the Virgin Mary, to show him the lost people of the Inferno and then bring him here. Thus, God's deep design, and the word for it's translated as design is fato, like fate, now demands payment from him with tears of repentance. It's not enough to say broadly things that we have done that we ought not to have done, things that we have not done that we ought to have done. She wants very explicit confession. Barely able to speak until prompted again by Beatrice, Dante, with tears and a voice hardly audible, confesses, present things with their false pleasure turned my steps as soon as your face was hid. Beatrice evokes further tears of remorse from him when she says that the realization that her own beauty crumbled into dust with death should have been sufficient to deter Dante from any sweet young thing or other vanity. So Dante, now contrite, his head bowed through all this, lifts his gaze, as bidden by Beatrice, to see her eyes staring. So we have to imagine, he's sort of where you all are. Beatrice is where I am, and the griffin is up there. And he can now be plunged into the stream of Lethe, its waters of forgetfulness purging him of memory of sin until he's ready to be drawn out by the ladies of the four cardinal virtues, who now bid him look into the eyes of Beatrice, reflecting the griffin, the beast which is one sole person with two natures. Again, that's another direct quote. The poem is just loaded with musical versions of the highest theology. The other three ladies, faith, hope, and charity, the theological virtues, entreat Beatrice to allow him to see her eyes, the emeralds from which love once shot its darts. That's the theological virtues that say that. At Dante, he marvels, filled with amazement and joy at the alternation of the two natures shining in the griffin. So he's seeing eagle, lion, eagle, lion. The virtues next tell Beatrice to turn and unveil her mouth, her second beauty, to the one, quote, who for sight of thee has made so great a journey. It's almost as if they're saying, Beatrice, you've lost all sense of what you started, not only as an innocent young girl of 8, but then when you sent these emissaries to Virgil to bring Dante here and what he's been through. So Dante is so overwhelmed with this experience, he says, that all his art and high inspiration fail him. This is what in literature is called the inexpressibility topos. I just can't say it. And when a poet this great says that, it has more than just somebody saying, I couldn't do my homework. So this is truly, as I think, is more powerful than anything at this point. So Beatrice smiles, and as the penultimate canto opens, Dante's eyes slake their 10 years' thirst. So you have to imagine he's just transfixed. He's seeing her really, not only for the first time since 10 years, but it's as if she's seeing him, or he's seeing her for the first time in a context that is so different. And that, I think, we're meant to understand, is the implicit possibility of all of us made in the image and likeness of God. So, the holy smile, it's called. And with this, all of his other senses are quenched. The holy smile of his beloved has drawn him into, here we go again, the old net, the antica rete. When he hears the three divine ladies, theological virtues, say, too fixed, troppo fiso, you're looking too long, and perhaps not the right way. Yet as he removes his eyes from the beatific smile of Beatrice, his sight must first recover as he is redirected to the pageant. And I'll just summarize that, which depicts the series of persecutions and political disasters that afflicted the church subsequently, that led to the Babylonian captivity of the church when it moves from Rome to Avignon for almost 70 years, with lots of chaos, anti-popes, and so on. So they're moved to tears, and he has to bathe himself in another river, the river of good thoughts, Unoe, and from this he comes forth remade, rifatto, and they're ready to go to paradise. And I have only 2 minutes, so I'll say this. I hope this encourages you to read the Divine Comedy, and I hope what I've done doesn't discourage you from reading it all together. But so when it comes to paradise, as your map shows you, it goes, the earthly paradise is a launching pad, and Dante ascends, and with Beatrice, ascends through the stars, through, as understood with the geocentric theory of the universe. So first you see the moon. It's the way we look out at the sky, and we would see, if we're lucky, Mercury, very hard to see, but then Venus, then the Sun, then Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Now, of course, the other planets were not known. Then there's a sphere called the sphere of the fixed stars that appear to be also moving as we watch them even through the night. And then finally, the primum mobile, the first moving thing, which moves everything else. And beyond that, the empyrean, the flaming, brilliant place where the mystical rose is, and all of the souls are assigned places. And there he gets to see, after Beatrice has led him as far as she can, and they are transhumanar, that is, transhumanized, or he is, so that they can make this trip and he won't perish. And each level, his eyes are it's like a series of spiritual ophthalmology where he is gradually acclimated so that he can see Beatrice as she most fully is in her place in the mystical rose, and Bernard of Clairvaux will take over. He points to where she is and then takes her to the Virgin Mary, and then ultimately to the final vision of God in the poem. And I'll just end by reading you, since we've talked about Beatrice and love and Dante, just the amazing prayer that he writes that he addresses to her, which is this: "O Lady," and this is not the Virgin Mary, this is to Beatrice. He says this as he looks at her. She's sitting right next to Rachel, the wife of Jacob, and says, "O Lady, you in whom my hope gains strength, who for my salvation have allowed your footsteps to be left in hell. In all the things that I have seen, I recognize the grace and benefit that I, depending upon your power and goodness, have received. You drew me out of slavery into freedom. Maintain your generosity so that my soul, which you have healed, when it is set loose from my body, be a soul that you will welcome." Probably one of the highest expressions of spiritual friendship that we can find in literature. So with that, he's able to see Mary, and finally the source, a glimpse of the Trinity. It's great we're doing this on Trinity Sunday. And the dual nature of Christ, seeing, quote, last line of the love that moves the sun and other stars. Thank you all for your patience. And even if you're exhausted, just know that I skipped a lot. But anyway.
Once again, just want to thank Tom for this presentation. And we've just been sort of gifted with a high-level seminar on Dante. And a couple of things that it brings, I think, to mind is, one, the importance of this long poem in the medieval era and also in ours, and how the Holy Scriptures are just embedded in the world from 2,000 years ago forward. As Tom, so wonderfully explained to us, Dante can't write the Inferno without the Bible. And so the Bible continues to influence not only his writing, but our lives and our writing. Father Benoist can talk about, how you can see it in movies, how the Bible lives in various ways. Various parts of our culture, our entertainments are informed by Scripture continually. So again, my thanks to Tom. And these presentations, it's not like I called Tom 2 weeks ago and say, "Hey, can you do this for me?" I think we talked something like 6 or 7 months ago, and a lot of preparation goes into putting these things together for you all. A couple things just to also bring to your attention. We will continue meeting during the summertime. After the services, it will be at this point, in the choir room at church. Now, if all you all show up next Sunday, there won't be enough room in the choir room, and we'll figure something else out. But we will be meeting through the summer every Sunday as we go through the Bible Challenge. The calendar has been posted, so you have access to that. We will need leaders every Sunday to just help with the discussion. So as you go through it, you can look ahead and say, I'm really interested myself in Daniel and how that works in sort of captivity and what it's like to be a colonized people. You might be interested in the story of Jonah, and when that comes up, you want to lead something on that. You might be interested in Revelation, and when that comes up, you want to lead something on that. So there are plenty of opportunities for all of you. We're not looking for biblical scholars. We're not looking for academics. We're just looking for people who are taken by the Word of God. So if that is you, and I think I know it is, we'll put out a sign-up sheet, and I invite you all to just scan it and see when you might want to sign up and lead one of our discussions during the summer. I think we might have time. I'll call it out for one question for Tom. There's like one question burning in the room.
What translation were you reading there, and is that considered the definitive English translation?
Well, you know, I think it's rightly said that reading poetry in translation is like kissing your lover through a veil. because, you know, so all translations are going to, some are better than others. The translations that I used specifically for this were the one by Alan Mandelbaum. He's an amazing scholar. He not only translated Dante, he translated Virgil, he's translated the Greek epics and so on. Just an amazing man. I don't know whether he's still alive, and it's also a very inexpensive version. And it has the facing Italian, you know, the Italian and then his translation on the other side. And it's also metrical in that it uses iambic pentameter as opposed to the 11-beat line that is much easier for Dante. What it does not do is rhyme, the way Dante does. And the one person who really tried very hard, or I think of two, Longfellow, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow tried to do that. And you can sample, you know, don't take my word for it, just sample it. So did Dorothy Sayers, you know, who many people know at least from her wonderful mystery stories and so on, but who was, you know, very much involved in an interest in medieval studies and so on in Oxford, Donna, and a very influential person. But I have to be honest with you, because English is such a different language, it begins sounding like Gilbert and Sullivan, you know. I mean, and I have nothing against Gilbert and Sullivan, but that kind of rhyme is not, Gilbert's rhyming is not worthy of Dante. It doesn't really convey the sense that it does. So if you like Gilbert and Sullivan, listen to Gilbert and Sullivan, but I don't know about Dorothy Sayers' notes and Barbara Ward. She wasn't able to finish her translation. Barbara Ward finished it for her, you know, which was a true gift of friendship between these two scholars. But another is, and this is an older translation, it's by Sinclair, John Sinclair, Scottish Don, who, and again, it's in Italian and English. The difficulty there, it's very close. His notes are brief and concise, you know, because Mandelbaum puts all his notes at the back, and so sometimes they're just too much. And that tends to be the case. That's why if you want to really delve into something, then there's a translation by Martinez that's really wonderful, or by John Hollander and his wife. But oh my gosh, I felt like I had, you know, discovered a fifth ocean in looking through those translations. So I think it's meant to be, I think, for the reader, as it was for Dante, a pilgrimage. And so, you know, I would say just, you know, the glory of Amazon is you can click and they give you a sample and you can see what's going to be most congenial if I'm really going to try to do this. But I think, you know, for this, and I have to confess that I altered things myself as I went along in some cases because I didn't think that they were possibly misleading, particularly when you're just plundering the text and taking something out of context, you know. So, in any event, I hope you all read at least part of it sometime. Not to have read Dante, I think, if one has the chance to do that, is a great loss. And like just one last thing, a story, Baltimore, a local story. T.S. Eliot visited Scott Fitzgerald and his wife Zelda when they were living in Baltimore on Park Avenue, just up the street from Grace and St. Peter's Church, and, you know, near the Mount Vernon area. And Zelda he came for dinner, and Zelda rushed to the door, and she said to, knowing that T.S. Eliot was, among other things, a real scholar and careful reader of Dante, she said, "I've just finished the Divine Comedy." And T.S. Eliot looked at her and he said, "Begun. Begun. You've just begun the Divine Comedy." You know, and this is not mock humility. Every time I pick up the book, I feel like, I know I'm not reading it for the first time. I'm reading it sometime, well, for the umpteenth time. But it's so rich that, and I think that that's, you know, this is not the official St. John's interpretation. But, you know, students would always say, well, what makes a great book? And I would say, a great book is a book that you never finish reading. You know, and that's true whether it's the Bible, you know, someone who, and yes, I'm not going to call them out, and she's not here, said to me, "You're all reading the Bible? I've already done that." And I just thought, well, within the Psalms itself, how many times do we have to rehearse the history of Israel? Why are they doing this? They're not even doing it in the same words or in the same way or to the same end. And so, anyway, all the best to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Blessings to you all on the day. And